Who could have predicted such bloody conflicts in Palestine 100 or 200 years ago? Who would have thought that Palestine would gradually be occupied to this extent? Where did it all begin? How did the Palestinians lose most of their land? In this video, we aim to explore the starting point of all these events, so stay with us. First of all, right at the beginning of this video, I want to make it clear that I will present all events completely neutrally. After the Roman Empire decided to exile the Jews from their land, the Jewish people were left without a homeland for nearly 2,000 years. They lived as immigrants in other countries. However, not all of those countries treated the Jews well, especially in Europe. During the Crusades, European states would even massacre Jews before fighting Muslims just to boost their morale. From the late 19th century onward, the situation became much worse. Anti-Semitism spread rapidly throughout Europe, especially in Eastern Europe and Russia. Jews were often the first victims of uprisings, even when they had nothing to do with the cause. Anti-Semitism in late 19th century Europe wasn't limited to ordinary people. Many European nationalists, radical Catholics, and even members of the educated and academic classes adopted anti-Jewish views. The Austro-Hungarian Empire, particularly its capital, Vienna, became one of the main centers for the spread of anti-Semitism among intellectuals and scholars. It's no coincidence that Hitler spent his teenage years in that very city. All of this made Jews feel increasingly rejected and hated across Europe, which in turn fueled their national spirit and desire to have a homeland of their own. Moreover, nationalism was rapidly and powerfully spreading across Europe at the time, and the Jews were not the only nation without a state that sought to create one. After numerous acts of violence against Jews in Eastern Europe, many of them began fleeing those regions. One of their popular destinations was Palestine. The Jews purchased fertile lands, especially in what is now northern Israel, with significant funds, and established Jewish agricultural settlements there. However, the lands they bought covered only a small portion of Palestine, and their population was not very large. Contrary to expectations, neither the Muslim Ottoman Empire nor the Arab feudal lords living in the region had any major issues with them. Only occasionally did minor conflicts occur between some Arabs and Jews, but these were by no means widespread. However, the situation quickly began to become more serious. In the late 19th century, a Jewish journalist named Theodor Herzl founded a movement that did not merely seek a few pieces of farmland but an independent country for all Jews worldwide. They called this movement Zionism, inspired by a hill near Jerusalem named Zion, which is mentioned in the Jewish Holy Scriptures. Members of this movement believed that Judaism was not just a religion, but also their national and cultural identity. They argued that just as Germans and Italians now desired independent nations, so too should Jews have their own. But there was a very, very big problem. Jews were a minority throughout Europe, and there was no land or region where they formed the majority. So, at the very first meeting of their movement, they considered the option of returning to Palestine and establishing the State of Israel. As conditions for Jews in Europe worsened and the Zionist movement spread, Britain offered the movement and the Jews a chance to settle in the eastern part of Uganda, which was then a British colony with plenty of vacant land. Contrary to expectations, Herzl, the leader of the movement, had no objection to this plan. In fact, he was a Jewish nationalist rather than a religious one, and what mattered to him was that Jews should have a country of their own, regardless of whether it was a remote land or the land of Canaan promised to them in the Jewish Holy Scriptures. However, before this plan could be implemented, Herzl passed away in 1904, and his successor considered only Palestine as the viable option. The movement grew increasingly popular, attracting Jews from all over the world, while some of them purchased even more land in Palestine. With increasing migration of Jews to Palestine and the growing influence of the Zionist movement, more Arabs began to feel threatened, and clashes between Jews and Arabs in Palestine intensified. However, these conflicts still did not involve the majority of the population, and neither the Ottoman Empire nor most Arab feudal lords were eager to expel or restrict the Jews. But everything changed in 1917. It was the late stage of World War I. The Ottoman Empire was severely weakened but still controlled Palestine. On November 9, 1917, the British Foreign Secretary, Arthur James Balfour, issued a letter addressed to a wealthy British Jewish lord for delivery to the Zionist Federation. This was the first high-level official support for the Zionist movement and, therefore, extremely valuable to them. In the letter, Balfour spoke rather vaguely. The main point was that the British government should establish a safe homeland for the Jewish people in Palestine. The letter did not explicitly call for the creation of a Jewish state, and was phrased in a way that also sought to somewhat appease the Palestinian Arabs. At that time, some Arab feudal leaders had joined forces with the British fighting against the Ottomans in exchange for promises of independence. Maintaining their support was important to Britain. Meanwhile, the Zionist movement had rapidly gained significant influence, and Britain wanted to have the support of Jews worldwide. For that reason, the letter was intentionally written in ambiguous terms so that Britain could later interpret it however it wished. This was one of the major turning points of the Zionist movement. After the declaration, a far greater number of Jews joined the Zionist cause. It is said that, shortly after the Balfour Declaration was issued, the number of Zionist Jews in the United States increased nearly 20-fold. On the other hand, the Palestinian Arabs, who became aware of this extremely significant declaration, felt far more threatened, and the clashes between Jews and Arabs grew much more intense. Thank you very much for staying with us until the end of the video. We'll continue the story in the next parts.